Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. In this series I'm looking at how the outdoors and nature has a positive impact on our mental health. So in this video I speak with Tracey, and Tracey lost her husband to cancer 5 years ago, and she explained to me how her love of nature facilitated her through the grieving process. But first of all I wanted to know, where did her love of nature first begin?
Well, my childhood was probably very idyllic in the sense of, the opportunities to be outside. So it was, I had parents who were very young in the age to start with. So we had travelled quite a bit with my dad's work. But they were very much, we always camped. Do you know what I mean? Our holidays were always going to Cornwall or going down to the north coast in Ireland or Scotland. And those are like my most vivid memories of childhood, helping dad and mum to pitch the tent and, being outdoors all the time. And also I had a granny who lived in a big old house, and all of the cousins used to go there. It was like a big old estate house, and all the cousins would have went there in the summer, and we literally spent our summer holidays catching butterflies, being out in different orchards and in the forests and building dens with fertilizer bags and everything like that. And, literally climbing trees, do you know what I mean, and being outdoors. And then I had parents who every Sunday wanted to go for a drive and then go for a walk. So being outside was, do you know what I mean, it was really, really important. And even there was just the daily chores of you got up every morning and went and walked the dog, do you know what I mean? And life then, you were outdoors, living in this below. There was badminton competitions and tennis Wimbledon competitions, and in the winter we would have had snowball fights, do you know what I mean, between the bridges and stuff like this. The only time I was ever really inside was if I was reading, do you know what I mean? But most of my childhood was spent outdoors.
So what did the outdoors give you?
I suppose now we're looking more about, wellness and, and what, there's a big surge on now about being outdoors, and I think especially during lockdown, there was such an emphasis on it. I suppose unconsciously growing up being outside all the time, it wasn't something you ever thought about. So it was always part of my psyche to be outdoors. I never wanted to be inside, and I'm never happier than when I'm in a field with no water, and it doesn't even have to, I love the rain. I was out this morning and I love actually running in the rain more so than running in hot weather. And I think for me, unconsciously, it's always given me a sense of kind of freedom. It's given me a sense of kind of being very centered, and it's given me a sense of adventure. Do you know what I mean? And with adventure, do you mean becomes sometimes that fear, do you mean, of the unknown. But when you kind of accomplish something outside, if it's jumping off a mountain, or it's getting the top of a mountain, or it's canoeing, and a lot of things I've done outside have been challenges to me at some stage in my life. But when you've done those, there's a real sense of I can do this. Yeah. And it's that mindset. So everything feeds into it, when you're doing something outside. It feels good to be outside, and it's never bad weather. I always say it's just in suitable clothing. Do you know what I mean? So it's about, for me, it's a holistic approach, do you know what I mean, to living, really, do you know what I mean? And it's something then that Gary and I brought into our family life from a very young age, do you know what I mean, with the children, do you know what I mean? It was something that we very naturally did. I remember, Gary would have worked away quite a lot with his job, and I remember, having Nikki in a pram, Alex in a backpack, and the dog, and just every day I would have went walking with the children, do you know what I mean? It was just part of my everyday routine, do you know what I mean? I never thought about it. It wasn't something I did for my wellness. It was just something that was part of my life. I got up and I did that. So as I've, mentioned before, I was married to Gary, and we were married for 15 years and probably gone out for a couple of years before that. And around 10 years ago, he was diagnosed, first of all, with a brain tumour, and then which was non-malignant, and then another primary tumour in his body, which was grade 4 cancer. And I have to say, 2 weeks before he was diagnosed with that, he just ran a 20-mile run and prepped for a Dublin marathon and stuff. So, and then unfortunately, Gary, he had basically a 5-year kind of battle with the second diagnosis was grade 4. So obviously it was terminal from the beginning, and he had a battle with cancer, and he lost his life to cancer 5 years ago and stuff. So during that time, after he first had the first brain tumour, it was when he took a massive seizure on a 10k run here in Ballinmallard, And you know what I mean, really healthy guy, do you know what I mean, and stuff like this, was always out running, there wasn't one piece of fat in his body, and he took him as, and that was non-malignant. And then like literally he had the operation to cut open his head, take the brain tumour out, and by Christmas he was back out running again. That was in September he had that operation. So the children have always kind of seen being outdoors and exercise and, you know what I mean, that kind of wellness as part of, you know what I mean, they've seen it in their dad. And when he was then diagnosed 18 months later then with the kidney cancer, it was kind of, anyone who goes through the journey of cancer with a loved one, or if you have cancer yourself, I suppose what the main thing is about is that it completely turns your life upside down. There's no ever going back to the way you were before, because the reality of death and the reality of illness is just so real and so prevalent. And the one constant for me, I suppose, during all of that time was the outdoors. And for me at that time, it was running. I was doing a lot of running, and my happy place is Benone. We have I'm in a caravan. I've been going there for 20 odd years to Benone, and the beach there, and also Nicarn is right on my doorstep. This craziness of cancer being really the centre of, and knowing that death was coming. And so for me, the one constant every day was to get out for a run and to get outside. And as a mother, you know, Gary and I were very open about the issue of cancer with our children. We talked about it. They were very aware of what was happening, because children physically could see their dad's health deteriorating. He went from a man who could run, 20 miles, no problem, to by the end, before he died, he was literally a paraplegic. He couldn't use any limb in his body. Do you know what I mean? Because the cancer had, eroded all of his bones and stuff. So, to go from that, they can see. So they knew the journey, do you know what I mean, of cancer, and they knew the inevitability that their dad was going to die. But for all of us, do you know what I mean, it was getting outside. Do you know what I mean, was the one constant. And there was, for me personally, I would have got up every morning and I've always been an early riser, and I would have went for a run before I went to work. And then I quite often might have went for a run when I would have come home, do you know what I mean, or a walk in Nicarn. And for the children too, up until Gary, could no longer, do you know what I mean, physically, walk anymore. We would have went to Benone, do you know what I mean, we'd have walked the beaches of Benone, we would have went out to Nicarn and Florence Court, and being outside was very much, and for me, if I hadn't have been able to get out to Nicarn, because it was the place where I could go and process, do you know what I mean, the craziness of the day, or the craziness of the reality. And there's very much a lot of talk now about mindfulness and being present in the moment for your own well-being. And what I found in Nicarn was, I would go running, and there's a tree, it's kind of at a crossroads, and there's like 4 different crossroads with this tree on the circle that I would go. And sometimes I could go a longer run, and sometimes I go a shorter run, but I always come to this tree. And every time I came to this tree, I would take cognizance of where I was at the moment, and where our family was at the moment, and where Gary's illness was at the minute, and literally I would be mindful of where I was. I would also kind of have a sense of the reality of where I was going, if that can make sense. Do you know what I mean? And it's been vital, do you know what I mean, in my healing of recovery. Being outdoors has been different things for me, do you know what I mean, in living with cancer within the family, and then living with grief, and also now on the road to recovery and wellness. It's been different things. Physically, just getting out, do you know what I mean, it's important from a wellness point of view, in the sense that it has brought a sense of routine. Do you know what I mean? It wasn't a conscious decision, but because it was something that was ingrained in me from a young age, I just naturally did it. And when I look back now, I don't even know where I got the energy from to get up every morning and go out running and stuff, but I did it. And when I was on the journey, I was able to kind of process it. And when I first started running years ago, I would have always ran with music, and then I started listening to music, and I actually just, the silence became my therapy. And it's where I kind of, all of those crazy kind of thoughts, and also too, I was able to kind of notice if my body was hurting, if my heart was really, hurting. And I cried, I talk about Nicarn being my therapy ground, do you know what I mean? Because you have to be strong sometimes when you don't want to be strong. So since Gary has died, being outdoors has been so important for my journey of recovery. About 3 years after he died, someone suggested to me about doing a marathon, and I was just like, oh, I couldn't do that, you know. And it was that really bad winter about 2 or 3 winters ago, and I set myself the challenge of doing the marathon, and it was amazing. It was one of the best things I'd ever done, and I think it was one of the best things was the fact that I suppose I always associated marathons with Gary. And I could still hear him. He was always like, of course you can do it, Tracey, you know what I mean, things like this. And when I did the marathon, it was the best experience of my life. And do you mean, there's very few things have come close to it. And do you mean, as I was running along, I felt like Gary was right beside me. And it was a challenge that I set myself. And it was a challenge that I overcame rather than something being thrown at me. Because when you're living with cancer and grief, it's like a boxing match. You kind of get, you know what I mean, especially when you're getting constant diagnoses and stuff. And I used to always say, you get up, you get your breath, and then another thing comes along. And I suppose, you mean, and that's the importance of the outdoors. Do you mean, I would say during Gary's illness, the running and being outside was my coping mechanism to get through a day, to get through, do you mean, the challenges of the individual day. And so I did that. Then afterwards, then for a year or two, do you mean, I would have got up and it was part of my routine. And then when I kind of gave up work, do you mean, and stepped off the career ladder a bit, you mean, I took on the challenge and I started to hike more. And that particular year, I had decided that New Year's that I wanted to get back into hiking more. And I wanted, because Gary and I would have hiked a lot and, you know, done, you know, trail walks and stuff like that all through, you mean, our 15 years together. And then I found a group of women, do you mean, that I could walk these, you know, trails with in these mountains. And since then I've met other groups of women and I've walked with them too. This morning, like, you know, even being outside this morning, you know, it's just part of the day now, but being outside, it gives me something that I don't think, it's only people who are used to being outside. You probably know this yourself, Linda, do you know what I mean? There's the routine of it, there's the familiarity of it. And then sometimes there's also the challenge of it where you mightn't want to be going out, do you know what I mean? But what I find is if I put on the waterproofs and I put on a hat, do you know what I mean? And I go out, I never regret going out, but I do regret if I don't go out.